I bear responsibility for fundamentally all that's happened of late. But here's the deal. You know, I wish you'd one day say these things. You know as well as I do that the former president made a deal with the Taliban that he would get all American forces out of Afghanistan by May 1. In return, the commitment was made, and that was a year before.
It's a disgrace, and it's about the withdrawal. It's not about getting out, because getting out is something I've wanted to do for a long time.
But if he said happening tonight as President Biden and former President Trump exchange accusations in the wake of those deadly attacks in Kabul. Let's pick it up there with tonight's political panel. Former Biden campaign surrogate Kevin Walling, editor of All Israel News, Joel Rosenberg, also author of the new book Enemies and Allies, about the tense relationship in the Middle East, and former chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz. Thank you all for doing double duty tonight. It's good to see you again.
Shannon, good to be back.
Joel, I want to start with you. We talked about the fact that there's an Israeli delegation, including the new prime minister, who will meet with the president tomorrow. That delayed because of the events of today. Give us a setting again for what this means to that region, watching this unfold with the U.S. Leaving Afghanistan in a way that brings, no positive connotations whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, is a former Special Forces commando himself. He was our defense minister. He's a protege of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So he's got a lot of experience, actually. But he came in, the whole plan was to talk about Iran and Iran's rapidly moving towards nuclear weapons. And he's still going to talk about Iran, but Biden is distracted. And I made this point in the previous hour. The Bennett team, the Israeli team, is struggling, right? If clearly President Biden doesn't know how to deal with the Taliban, so how are you going to build confidence that you know how to deal with Tehran, the terror masters who are rapidly racing towards nuclear weapons? And as I point out in my new book, it's coming out soon, Enemies and Allies, Biden is not showing strength with our enemies, and he's not building trust with our allies. And what he needs to do is sit down with the key leaders of the region, the Arab Muslim leaders who fight radical Islam every day. I actually do that. And in the book, I take you into the palaces and you meet the King of Jordan, the President of Egypt, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and the others. And I talk to them for hours on the record. It's in the book, how they fight radical Islam, how they understand it. Biden clearly does not, and he's got to stop pretending that he does, because Americans are dying because he completely doesn't get it, and it's humiliating.
I'm going to read something from Josh Hawley today. Republican senator says this: Joe Biden has now overseen the deadliest day for U.S. troops in Afghanistan in over a decade, and the crisis grows worse by the hour. We must reject the falsehood peddled by a feckless president that this was the only option for withdrawal. This is the product of Joe Biden's catastrophic failure of leadership. It is now painfully clear he neither has the will nor the capacity to lead. He must resign. Kevin, based on the president's remarks today, I don't think that's under consideration from him or his team at all. But how does he answer now these charges that this was the only option, not to leave, but the way in which we left?
Yeah, Shannon, this president absolutely has the will to lead. And I just saw your tweet that we lost 10 Marines, 2 Army soldiers, and 1 Navy corpsman. And obviously this weighs on the president's heart and soul. As I said earlier, he's the most recent president as vice president to have a son serving in a combat zone. So he has the will to finish this mission out in these next 5 days. Any calls for any kind of resignation or impeachment of him or his team really are a distraction from this core mission that he is set to accomplish in these next couple of days. No one in the wake of 9/11 called for George W. Bush as a Democrat to resign. So this is just party politics when we need to focus on the mission, supporting the troops on the ground, paying tribute to those lives lost, and supporting this effort in the waning days in Afghanistan.
Jason, what do you make of that comparison, 9/11 to what we're watching now?
It is stunning to think that Joe Biden can make up the excuse of blaming Donald Trump and then look at the way he executed the program. Let's go back to the fact that Obama and Biden were the ones that let people out of Guantanamo Bay and put them back on the playing field. And it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. And Donald Trump put us on a trajectory that I totally agree with. I took a public position in 2009. It's time to get out of Afghanistan. But how the commander-in-chief, Joe Biden, did it, I can't find a single person who said, that was our best foot forward. That was the best plan, Mr. President. Because, look, it's costing lives. By estimates, there's over 1,000 Americans that are there that may never get out. And to give this, if this story is true, and we don't know if it's true yet, to give a list to the Taliban, for goodness sake, of the targets of people that we want to go by checklist, it is absolutely stunning. You cannot find anybody that's reasonable to say that was the best laid plan.
Joel, you live in the region, and now what we're hearing is concern, growing concern about this being a jumping off place, a breeding ground for other terror groups. We've seen what ISIS-K is believed to have done with killing 13 of our service members today. But there are many, many other groups and factions and, lots of bad guys, as I said earlier, in that region. Do you worry that this provides more of a place, of a comfort, a place for them to grow and spawn?
Absolutely. Like, there's a lot of enemies, and the enemies are gaining strength. They feel, the radical Islamists inside Afghanistan feel like they brought down the Soviet Union, and now they're bringing down the United States, that Allah's with them, that the wind is at their back. One of the things I point out in this new book, Enemies and Allies, is if you look at Biden's record, it's not heartening, right? Because in 2011, he takes pride that he was the one that convinced Obama to pull all U.S. forces out of Iraq. What happened? Al-Qaeda in Iraq morphed in that vacuum into ISIS and led a genocide, an outright genocide against Christians, against Muslims who disagreed with them in any way, against Yazidis. It was horrifying. And it took a lot of blood and treasure to recapture and liberate, really, Syria and Iraq. And what does Santayanas tell us, right? If those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Joe Biden is not showing that he's strong with our allies. He's not creating fear in our enemies. And that weakness is opening up the floodgates. And I, who live in a small country in the Middle East, am horrified by what I'm seeing in Washington.
Kevin, the president says we're sticking to the August 31st deadline, but he also says no one's going to be left behind. How does that work? Do you think he owes the American people more of an explanation about how that's possibly compatible?
I think he does. And you saw the Secretary of State speak to that. You saw the president speak to that in terms of answering questions. I don't think they wanted to get into the specific numbers of Americans and any kind of tactical assessments of that going forward. But hopefully, as we'll see in these next 5 days, we saw 500 Americans brought out of the country in the last 48 hours. Hopefully that number of Americans is dwindling as we get closer to that deadline next week. But we owe it to them. We owe it to the people in Afghanistan that helped us along the way to do all that we can to get them out in these waning days. Yeah, and to these families who will be grieving for the loss of those who will never come home after this attack today. We got to leave it there. We really appreciate all of your time. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Shannon.
All right, we will continue to bring you the very latest as it comes in. It's now morning there in Afghanistan. Our continuing coverage goes on, and Congressman and veteran Mike Garcia joins us live. Plus, we'll take a quick look at the other day's headlines today. Coming up.